And welcome. And we're going to go with the bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we are in vaYetzei. That's the parsha we are in. That which is, of course, last week at the end of Toldot, we read about how Jacob had stolen the blessing and tricked Esau out of his blessing, and that basically Esau was angry enough to try and get him killed. And besides which, another reason, so he needed to escape. Another reason was that that Isaac and Rebekah were not very happy with the wives that Esau had chosen, and that he needed to go back to Padan Aram to find a suitable wife. So that was reason. So he's now on his way, and he's arrived there, and we're actually well into this parsha, and we are talking about how he actually was tricked by Laban. His life is going to flip for the rest of his life. He is not going to be this young, smart, alecky person. He is going to pay the prices for these things. And so now he has been tricked into marrying Leah, and he would have just married Rachel. That would have been the end of it. But Laban, his father-in-law, tricked him, and that's where we're at. He now has Rachel and Leah as his co-wives. Vayar Hashem, the Lord saw Kisnu Leah, that Leah was hated. Um, I don't know that she was hated per se, but I'm sure it had to be complicated because, of course, Jacob would not have married Leah had it been the choice, right? So even if she wasn't hated in the normal sense that we would talk about hatred, nevertheless, she must have felt like a second-class citizen compared to her sister. And God saw this. Vayiftach et Rachma. He opened her womb. Rachel akara. But Rachel was barren, no children. So some powerful issues going on here. Vatahar Leah, and Leah became pregnant. She conceived. Vatelet ben, and she gave birth to a son. Vatikra shmo Reuven. She called his name Reuven. Ki amra, because she thought. Ki ra'ah Hashem be'oni. The Lord has seen my affliction. Ki ata yehavani isha. This is so beautiful when you think about it, how the sentence ends, because now my husband will love me. Interesting, right? And of course, her ability to provide him with a son was of ultimate importance. But you see in this sentence her desire to be loved by Jacob. And there's such pathos, I think, suggested by that line. Vatikrashmo Reuven, she called his name Reuven. Rabotenu Pirshu. So our sages explained, and the reference is to the tractate Brachot, page 7. Amra, they said, Ra'u ma ben Amra, that she said, Ra'us, look, ma ben beni levain chami, right? So she said, look at the difference between my son and the son of my father-in-law. In other words, we're talking about Esau, that she's referring to Esau here. Shemachar habachora leYaakov, who sold his birthright to Jacob. Vezeh, and this one, lo machara, he did not sell his birthright. Let's keep going. LeYosef, to Joseph, and that is because Joseph was the firstborn of Rachel. He's not around yet. Rashi is going to make a reference to that fact, okay? But that, as he said, the rabbis interpreted, in other words, in a they saw a literary connection here. The fact that Reuben was her firstborn and the firstborn born. And on the other hand, Joseph was Rachel's firstborn. And clearly, Jacob preferred Joseph and treated him like the firstborn. And so what she's saying is that here Joseph became the firstborn. He received the birthright. It wasn't because Reuben sold it to him. It wasn't because Reuben didn't have enough respect or desire of the birthright, right? As Esau showed when he sold his birthright to Jacob, right? V'lo ir'er alav. But not only that, right? Not only did he not sell his birthright to Joseph, but he didn't protest against it. He didn't, because he really was the first one born. He never made a protest against it. V'lo od shelo ir'er alav. And not only the fact that he did not protest against his brother, his half-brother receiving, and his younger half-brother receiving that birthright. Not only that, he did not protest, ela shebikesh lohotzio min habor. But as we find out later on, Reuben, when the brothers threw him into the pit, Reuben wasn't around, and he was hoping to, at least they were planning on killing him, and Reuben was around when they threw him into the pit, but he thought he would come back and get him out of the pit and restore him to his father. In other words, he could have so easily just allowed the brothers to kill him, or ultimately they sold him. But as far as he was concerned, they killed him. But the fact that here he was, and what I think is wonderful is how the rabbis are looking into the implications of the text here and looking into it and making that contrast here between Reuben and Jacob, and between Esau, right, and Reuben, and the fact that he was a righteous person, kept bringing out his righteousness. Going on. Vatahar od, and she conceived again. Vateled ben, and she gave birth to a son, another son. Vatomer, and again she said, Ki shama Hashem, ki snua anochi. The Lord has heard, Hashem has heard, that I am hated. Vayiten li gam etzeh, right? And he has given me this too, the miracle of conception and birth, right? And that this seen as a gift of God. Vatikrosh shmo Shimon, and so she named him Shimon. And that is based, of course, you notice the root here, Shama, and up here, Shama, right? In other words, and again, we see, despite the fact that she provided Jacob with Reuben, she still felt that she was spurned as opposed to Rachel. Truly, Rachel, I believe, and Jacob are the example of love at first sight. And that kind of love that Leah was unfortunately unable to have. And of course, even if I would say, I was just thinking that even if Jacob felt more kindlier towards Leah at this point after giving birth to Reuben, the fact that she had experienced that relationship to begin with, I think would always sort of haunt her. She'd always have that kind of feeling that she was hated. Vatahar od, vateled ben, and once again she conceived and gave birth to a son, Vatomer, and she said, Ata, now, hapam, this time, Yilave ishi elai, my husband will accompany me. Right? Again, look at this, how all these names have some reference to a desire for a loving relationship with Jacob. Ki yaladati lo shlosha banim, because I have given birth for him 3 sons, al ken karashmo Levi, and for that reason she called him Levi. and that's the word vatalave. Excuse me, 1 second. So so now you know that the word Levi essentially is the word to accompany. The word for a funeral is a levaya. It's based on the same word because the idea is that we accompany the deceased for burial and that they are accompanied by us. And then, of course, the tribe of Levi, the idea of their accompanying the Kohanim, or the fact that they accompanied God in their service to God. So that there are all those kinds of suggestions from that word. Here we go. Hapam yilave ishi. At this time, my husband will accompany me. And this is from Bereshit Rabbah. And here we go. Remember, because she was talking when Reuben was born, right? She made a prediction that involved Joseph, who wasn't around at the time, right? So, lefi sha'imahot neviot hayu, right? Our matriarchs were prophetesses. They were prophets. V'yodot sheyud beit shvatim yotzim miYaakov, and they already knew that Jacob would sire 12 tribes, that they would come, they would issue from Jacob. For Arba Nashim, they also knew Esau, that he would marry 4 wives. Amra, so Leah thought, Me'ata, now, Ein lo pitchon pe alai, he has no reason to complain about me. Sheharei natalti kol chelki bevanim, because I have achieved my allotment of sons. Of course, 12 sons, 4 wives, 3 apiece. So she would have thought she had now accomplished, assuming that Jacob would have 3 sons from each one of his wives. So, okay, for this reason, kol mi shene'emar bo al kain. So if it says here, anyone who concerning whom it states al kain, for this reason, meruba ba'ochlusin, he would have many descendants. Uchlusin are like population, right? So when it says al kain, they would have a very large number of people in the tribe. Chutz mi Levi. However, Levi was an exception. Levi was perhaps the smallest tribe of them all subsequently. Why? Sheha'aron haya mechale bahem. Interesting thing to think about. Why? Because the ark, the Aron HaKodesh, mechale bahem, it would lessen them, it would finish them off, it would destroy them, etc. Right? Kliya is a word that means end of some kind. So this is something, okay, so we can actually refer back to an earlier interpretation of why Esau sold his birthright, because he knew that having this very close proximity to the divine source in some ways would ensure that there weren't so many of them. So why is that the case? So the example I like to give is why children in a classroom like to sit at the back. They like to sit at the back of the class, and the assumption is that the teacher won't notice their moments when they behave or talk to each other or behave badly. Whereas if they sit in the front of the class, the teacher will be able to pay more attention to their behavior. And there's a similar kind of thought here, that being closer to this source of divine power made people much more vulnerable to divine punishment if necessary. And because the Levi'im were encamped so close to the tent of meeting, etc., and the nature of their work, they would be judged more harshly because of this. So that's why they did not populate as much as the other tribes. Karashmo Levi, right? So here we go. His name was called Levi, or he called his name Levi. Rashi points out, Bechulam, regarding all the others, it says, in other words, if we look at Reuven, Shimon, Reuven and Shimon, we notice that it says Vatikra. She called them. Ketiv Vatikra. Shehi Kara, that is, that she named them, right? She called them. Veze, but this one with Levi, Katav Bo Kara. There it mentions, it says, he called. Veyesh Midrash, and there is a Midrash, Agadah, right? There is a legend. Midrash Agadah is a legend. Ve'ela Hadvarim Rabbah, in Dvarim Rabbah, the Midrash Rabbah on the book of Deuteronomy, Sheshalach HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Gavriel, that the Holy One, blessed be He, that God essentially sent Gabriel, the angel, Vehevi or Lefanav, and brought him before him, right? That's before he was born, that his soul was brought before God. And of course, again, from a literary perspective, right, this fits in beautifully with the subsequent decision that Levi would be the ones to be the tribe that would serve in the temple. The Kara Lo Shem Zeh, that God gave him this name. He named Levi, that little soul, the name of Levi. So that the he named is referring to God, that God named him. B'shem zeh, v'natan lo kaf dalet matanot kahuna, and he gave him the 20, we'd say, gifts of the priesthood. They were perquisites that Kohanim had. They're mentioned in the book of Numbers as specifically as to what these perks were. V'al shem shelivahu b'matanot, and because he was accompanied with gifts, right, with these gifts, Karo Levi, God called him Levi. So just noticing, right, that in all the other cases, there's Vatikra, right, she named, but in case of Levi, it says Kara, right, Al-Kain Kara, he called his name Levi. Vatahar od, so again, Leah conceived. Vateled ben, right, and she again gave birth to a son. Vatomer, and again she says, Hapam odeh et Hashem. This time I will give thanks to God. In other words, now that she had a fourth son, Rashi's going to comment on that. Al ken kara shmo Yehuda, and for this reason his name was, she called his name Judah, Yehuda, and from the word odeh, right, odeh, to thank. But ta'amud miledet, and at that point she ceased from conceiving and giving birth. At that point, comment on that. Pam hadeh. This time I will acknowledge, I will give thanks. Shenatalti yoter micheche, that I took more than was my portion, right? She expected only to have 3 sons, and here she had 4 sons, and so she felt a special level of gratitude to God, right? Mechaki, me'ata, and for this reason, right? Yesh li lohodot, I indeed have to acknowledge and give thanks. New chapter. Vatere Rachel ki lo yaldal leYaakov. And Rachel saw that she was not able to bear from children from Jacob. Vatikane Rachel ba'achota. The text itself says Rachel was jealous of her sister, right? It is an interesting form, tikane, right? And she was jealous of her sister. Vatomer el Yaakov, and she said to Jacob, Hava li vanim, give me sons, give me children. Ve'im ayin meta anochi, because if I don't have children, meta anochi, I will die, right? Or I am dead. I am dead if I don't have any. And that translation is significant, as we'll see. Okay, vatikane Rachel ba'achota. Just want to make sure I'm pronouncing it right. Vatikane. So, kin'a or kan'a b'ma'aseha tovim. She was jealous of her in terms of good deeds. So she wasn't jealous in the normal sense of saying that someone's jealous of somebody else, but rather she was jealous in that she had more good deeds. What's the thought behind this? Amra, she thought, ilule shetzka mimeni, if it weren't for the fact that she was more righteous than I, lo zachta levanim, she would not have merited having children. So again, this is from Bereshit Rabbah, right? So she was jealous of her goodness, is what she's saying here, what the text is saying. And that also, of course, that we see that the ability to conceive was seen as such a gift from God, a reward, and that here, according to this interpretation, right, Rachel figured that Leah must be a better person, must be a tzaddiket, because she was rewarded with sons. Havali, give me. V'chichach asa avicha le'imecha, right? And did in fact your father, this is her, I think this is sort of an imaginary conversation that she had with Jacob, that Rachel had with Jacob. V'chichach asa avicha le'imecha. What did your father do such a thing to your mother? V'halo hitpalel aleha. And indeed, he prayed regarding her. In other words, you just let the situation stand, but your father actually, when Rebecca was unable to conceive, your mother wasn't able to conceive, we read about how Isaac prayed for her. Meta anochi, I am dead. Mikan, this, and so from this expression, we learn, Lemisha ein lo banim, someone who has no children, chashuv kamet, it's as if they are considered as if they're deceased. Okay, so this, of course, there are many who these days choose not to have children. That's a very different story, I think, from here, and we just also have to allow for the times in which this was written and the context in which it was written. We'll take one more verse. Vayichar af Yaakov Rachel, and Jacob became angry. He became incensed at Rachel. Vayomer, and he said, Hatachat Elohim anochi, am I in the place of God? Asher mana mimech pri baten, who withheld from you the fruit of the womb, right? An emotional reaction for sure, right? So because I would say that Jacob himself was extremely frustrated and upset about the fact that he wasn't able to have a child with Rachel. And I think the very fact that he favored Joseph, who was Rachel's child, I mean, the whole biblical story is set up to lead to that moment when she's finally able to have a child. So, hatachat, am I in the place? V'chi bimkomo ani, am I in his place? Asar mishmin, asher mana mimech, who withdrew from you, right? Prevented you. At amart, you said, or you thought, she e'eseh ka'aba, right? You thought or you said that I needed to do what my father did. Ani eini ka'aba, right? I am not like Abba. I'm not in that same situation like my father. Abba lo hayu lo banim. My father did not have any children at all. Ani yeshli banim, but I do have children. I do have children. So when my dad prayed for Rebecca, for your aunt, okay, then he had reason because he had no children at all. But where do I stand off, in a sense, presenting my case when I do have children? Okay. Adamart, you said, She'esek Abba, right? Sorry, we already said this. Forgive me. Uh, so just finishing this off, forgive me. Uh, okay. Yesh li banim mimech mana velo mimeni. So that what God withheld was from you, but did not withhold from me. So I'm not in the same position as my father, as Isaac, because Isaac didn't have children either. And so he was able to pray on his own behalf and on his wife, on Rebecca, on my mom's behalf as well. And we'll stop right here for today. Give me a moment. Oh, sorry. This, that's not working. And here we are. And we got to this point here. Very good. And I'm going to stop the share. Any thoughts or questions before we?
Yeah. How
Yeah.
many sons did Leah produce?
Leah
Actual
produced
sons.
actually 6 sons
6 sons. Then how
and
many
and
sons
a
was?
daughter and a daughter and a
Oh, and a
daughter.
daughter,
Yes.
Diane.
Dina.
Oh,
Yes.
Dina was Dina.
Close. Yes.
Ah, and how many were the concubine sons? How many were
Each
they?
one, were able to have two.
Two. Okay.
Yes, Rachel had two, and Bila had two, and Zilpah had two. So that makes up the 12. And
Ah,
yeah. Mhm.
okay. Wow.
Okay. So we'll
Rabbi,
call
I
it.
would
Yes, go ahead.
Rabbi, I would say that the Jacob's comment or reaction to Rachel's
Yes. Complete.
anguish
Yes.
stands in contrast to the reaction or interaction of Elkanah with Hannah,
Yes.
uh,
True.
right?
Nice. Good observation. No, it's a lovely observation.
Hmm.
Sometimes when you're in love with someone, when you're actually in a love situation, sometimes one's reactions aren't as loving as one might want to think, right? And I would say that Jacob was extremely upset, both for himself and for Rachel, that they weren't able to conceive. I'm sure he was. So it wasn't a fun answer, that's for sure. It was a hurtful answer, but in some ways, I think that indicates the highly emotional relationship he had with Rachel.
After Rachel died, he became more acquainted with Leah and started to love her.
Well, we hope so. We hope so. We'll have to see what happens when we get to that position, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So take care. And I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay.